All right, let's get started. Hello, Internet. I'm Jackie Fox, and welcome to a talk about our current economic situation. But first, I would like to give a couple of shout-outs. The inhaler you just saw me use, thankfully, was given to me by an anarchist friend who happened to have an extra prescription and was appalled by my lack of medical care. And that has really made my life easier, and is something that I owe a huge debt of gratitude to that person for. There's another anarchist who's actually helping me try to fix my computer right now, and I owe a debt of gratitude to them as well. So thank you, anarchists. And this is the amazing thing about being on the left, is that we all realize how bad capitalism is and how bad the economic situation currently is, and we are very willing to extend charity to one another for that reason. Okay. Economics. Such a fun topic. To explain the current economic situation that we're in and why we find ourselves in it, I first have to go back in time just a lot, back to about the Great Depression. So we had a giant stock market collapse, and this affected the banks. And the reason that this affected the banks is because the banks were heavily invested in the stock market. There was no barrier between the place where you put your money and investment banks, which risked money. Therefore, the risks at that point, because of the stock market collapse, were able to overwhelm the amount of money that the banks had, and therefore there was this huge fear that the banks would not have your money if you went to get it. And then because of the way our banking system works, because of the run on the banks, banks are only really required to keep about 10% of the money that they have on hand, and more than 10% of people came to get their money. So basically there wasn't enough money to give out, and the banks were stuck in a situation where they had to start turning people away and saying, we don't have your money. Now, that led to an act being passed through Congress called the Glass-Steagall Act, which created a barrier between the banks that you would put your money in and banks that would invest your money and risk it in the stock market. And this was a great thing. And this actually kept going until the 1990s. And it was Congress, again, that repealed it. And one of the Congress people who repealed it happened to be the lovely Joe Biden. But I'm not making this video to shit on Joe Biden today. I just wanted to point out that he is in part responsible for the situation that we find ourselves in today. So 2008. The things that led up to 2008 was that for the housing market, they just started giving loans to pretty much anyone. There were no credit checks, all sorts of things. So you had a lot of people who probably shouldn't be taking loans for houses, which is kind of a good thing. I mean, it meant that basically anyone could get a house. But at the same time, it also meant that traditionally stable mortgages were now very risky. So what happened was, or what was happening was, they were bundling all of these debts into packages called CDOs, or collateralized debt obligations. And because of the way that rating systems rated these were considered to be pretty much a sure thing, a sure bet. Because the logic was that people needed their house so much that they would basically eat rice, let their car go, basically do anything they could to still pay their mortgage. So these were considered very safe. But because of the fact that we've been offering them to a lot of people who really financially shouldn't have gotten them, or wouldn't be able to pay for them long term, by 2008, enough people were defaulting on their mortgages that the value of the CDOs started to collapse. Now, since we didn't have the Glass-Steagall Act, and these CDOs were considered to be very safe bets, our banks had heavily invested in them. And our banks ended up having so much debt that it, like the Great Depression, threatened to take them under. And for better or worse, we bailed them out. I don't necessarily disagree with us bailing them out, because there would have been some real big problems if we hadn't. I do disagree with the way that we did it, and that's something that Bernie Sanders is much more eloquent on than I will be during this live stream. But essentially, we got ourselves into that problem for a number of reasons, but one of the biggest ones is the repeal of Glass-Steagall. Now, one of the things that you would have imagined that we would have done after that is reinstate Glass-Steagall so that this wouldn't happen again. And as I was a part of Occupy Wall Street, that was something that we were all pretty much talking about doing. You need to get Glass-Steagall back so we don't repeat the mistakes of 2008. But no one did that. And pretty much the only person that I remember talking about it was Bernie Sanders. And in part, this is the reason that I'm a Bernie Sanders supporter, is because I remember him talking about the Glass-Steagall Act when nobody else would, and standing up for bringing it back. And that was very refreshing to me. So we find ourselves in the coronavirus crisis right now. With so many people being laid off work, early in April, we came to a situation where 1/3 of Americans could not pay their rent. Because the previous situation that we were in was one where over half of America didn't have $1,000 in the bank for an emergency. So we find ourselves in an emergency that easily eats through that $1,000 as you panic buy toilet paper and whatever, and try to get your bills paid. And all of those people who didn't have that now can't pay rent. Plus, people are being laid off work, so they aren't able to live even paycheck to paycheck anymore. And then because of the massive demand on an unemployment system that wasn't designed to handle record levels of unemployment, we haven't been able to get unemployment checks out fast enough. And now we see the rent and housing markets beginning to collapse again. That by itself would be a repeat of everything that led to 2008. But it's actually worse than that, because even more people cannot pay their mortgages and rent now than in 2008. In addition to that, and this is something that I wrote about 4 years ago, when I was working for a financial services company, I was looking into the auto loan industry, which is actually an even worse setup industry than the housing market was in 2008. So there's the potential for a huge bubble there as well. So what we're looking at is not only an even bigger housing collapse than 2008, but also the auto loan industry is going to face a similar collapse as well, as people can't pay their car payments. And that's just those two. There are tons of other industries that will probably also collapse as well. You also have all of these small businesses that can't get any business right now, so those are probably going to fall apart. The people they pay rent to aren't getting their money anymore, so that's probably going to fall apart. All of this adds together to be a pretty huge economic collapse on a scale that we may have never seen before. And that's a big downer. So let me bring you to what can we do about it, because there are a lot of things that we could at least get Congress to try to do about it. And to be honest with you, I don't have a lot of faith in Congress. I think that we are going to have to act as kind of a coordinated citizen lobbying group to pester the living shit out of them to do the right thing. But the question becomes, what is the right thing? Well, to paint in a broad stroke, to give you kind of a broad idea of what we should be doing, and this might seem pretty obvious to everyone in the audience, but I want to lay it out in a really simple, logical way so that people can understand it easily and relay it easily to their congresspeople. The current plan seems to be to put money in at the top to keep those businesses that are failing on their feet. The problem with this, while it does do that in the short term, is if we don't have any money, they still aren't getting money from us. They have to get all of their money from the government. That's not going to work long term. A better long-term solution, one that's actually less expensive as well, is to put an even smaller amount of money into the bottom of the economy directly to the people. We've been doing this just a little bit through these $1,200 stimulus checks. But we need a lot more than that. We need more like maybe a $10,000 stimulus check. That would cost around $3.3 trillion collectively for America, which is approximately the amount of money that the Fed has dumped into the top of the market in just 3 days. So don't tell me it can't be done. Now, there is the difference between the money that we gave as kind of like low interest loans and what I'm proposing, which would be free money. And yes, that's a little bit more problematic on its face. However, it's probably less problematic because you don't have to pump nearly as much money in it to do it this way. And let's face it, that money is going to filter back up because we're going to pay our rent. It's going to pay our landlords. Our landlords are going to be able to secure the housing market through collecting that money. CDOs aren't going to collapse. That's going to be good for banks. Basically, that money will trickle up very effectively. So it still doesn't necessarily put us in the best situation, but it does stabilize the economy rather well. But that also leaves out a lot of small businesses that are non-essential right now, and we definitely need to take care of those as well. For what it's worth, there are people in Congress that are pushing for that. One that I can think of off the top of my head is Marco Rubio. He's been especially vocal about it. But there is actually another program that I really like that is coming from Josh Hawley. This is actually being discussed by Congress right now. Now, they are currently on break, so they aren't going to be able to do anything about it for a while. I don't know why they don't come back, but, that's the situation we're in. It's called the PPP, or the Paycheck Protection Program, which would take, I want to say, like $250 billion and give it to small businesses so they can continue to make payroll for their employees, which is kind of another way of doing what I'm suggesting, except it's a little less universal. And it would also apply to people who have previously been laid off. And it would also help small businesses somewhat to remain stable. So that's definitely something that we need to push for. But you'll also probably notice, trickle-down economics doesn't work, and it's not going to work for this. We need trickle-up. You also notice that $250 billion isn't nearly enough for all of these businesses to make payroll. We need to be pushing them to raise that number. That needs to be in the trillions, absolutely. We also need concrete solutions for small businesses, whether that be through the same kind of interest-free loans that we're giving to the top, or, I don't really know. If anybody has any suggestions of how exactly we can help small businesses, I'd be open to hear those. But I really think that probably the best thing that we can do overall is to give everyone a good chunk of money, because small businesses are owned by normal people. If we put money in their hands, they can use it to shore up their businesses as well. But that being said, businesses have generally much bigger bills than we do, so it may not help them as much. We may need a separate solution to work for them as well. But there's actually another issue, another set of people that are going to need money, because while the federal government can print its own money, it's never really under any circumstances, especially in the United States, going to run out, because they can just make the money printers go burr, burr, burr. State and local governments aren't held by the same rules. They are effectively held to balanced budget rules, which means if they aren't bringing in money from things like sales tax, property tax, etc., then they aren't able to make payroll for things like fire services. So imagine a situation where, say, tomorrow, or next week, your state or local government has run out of money. They have had to send firefighters home, and your house catches on fire. Now there's no one to help you with that situation, and really that is a big problem. We need the federal government to step up and pay state and local governments to keep them whole during this crisis, or a lot of things are really going to fall apart for us. A lot of you may also... there's a lot of ways that we are even more dependent on our state and local governments than we are on the federal government. We need to keep those things funded as well. So that's kind of the list of demands that we need to be pestering the shit out of every representative politician we have to do something about. So just to go through that again, we need something like the Payment Protection Program. We need something like an emergency UBI to bring money up from the bottom, trickle up economics. We need to be helping small businesses that are non-essential keep their money. Because otherwise, all of this effort is just going to go to like Walmart and Amazon. All of this money we're putting in at the bottom is going to go to those because they're basically all that's open. And we still need to buy things. Like, we still need to get food. People still need to eat, even though this is a crisis. And, of course, we need to support state and local governments. So I think that three-pronged approach of helping the people, helping small businesses, and helping state and local governments is exactly what we need to be demanding of our federal government right now. We need a stimulus package that covers all three of those things. And they don't seem terribly inclined to do it. And as you'll notice, I've only mentioned a few Congress people because it seems like they are in the relative minority, people who are actually addressing these issues. Now, people like Bernie Sanders, Ilhan Omar, a lot of the Justice Democrats are also talking about this stuff. In fact, I heard a lot of these ideas for the first time watching a Bernie Sanders live stream with the squad. So there are people that are talking about it, but we need to give them their vocal support because the establishment is not at all inclined to do these things, even though things are going to get really bad if they don't. They tend to be inclined to say, how are you going to pay for it? Which is a shitty question and for reasons that I will explain in a future video. But, in the meantime, you can look up something called modern monetary theory and try to wrap your head around that. But I'm going to try to explain that in a future video series that's not going to be live like this. But Bernie Sanders on Bill Maher, on Real Talk with Bill Maher, actually brought up a lot of these issues. And Bill's first question was, well, how can we afford to pay for any of that? And Bernie gave him the right answer here. He said, it's going to be expensive. You're absolutely right. But what is going to be so much more expensive is trying to rebuild the economy if we allow it to collapse. The thing we absolutely must do is not allow it to fail to begin with. Or digging ourselves out of this hole is going to be way more expensive. And if you're still asking how do you pay for it at that point, America is fucked. And I don't want America to be fucked. I don't think you want America to be fucked. Even if you don't believe in the American system of government, literally everything falling apart without any sort of a plan is obviously going to cost a lot of lives. And that is something I would like to avoid. After this is all over, after we have gotten used to flexing our power in this way, we need to start advocating for real change for a more leftist system. We need to start abandoning capitalism. And the good news is, I think that with all of these problems being so in everyone's face, and with so many people waking up to the idea that the Federal Reserve can literally print $1 trillion a day with no real consequences if they want to, it's going to make it really hard for them to tell us no if, this is the big part, if we are incredibly vocal and consistent and determined in demanding it. That's going to mean that you're going to have to start calling your representatives. You're probably going to have to leave them voicemails. They aren't going to answer you. It's probably going to be a staffer that listens to those. But if their phones ring constantly, if they're constantly getting 2 and 3 calls from us all the time, their phones just don't stop ringing, that will send a very powerful message about what we want. But we also need to go into this with a list of demands. And that is something that I am trying to lay out for you here in this video. But I also think that it would be helpful for people to kind of write scripts for these kind of calls. And that's something that I've pitched doing before. Everything about my life right now has been a little bit of an unrelenting nightmare, but it's been a really tough year. But I'm going to try to make some effort to do that. If some of you guys want to do that as well and leave them on this Facebook page, or some of your ideas for demands that we should be making of Congress and how they can act to save the individuals, save small businesses, save local and state governments, absolutely leave them in the comments of this video, leave them on my Facebook page, tweet them at me. I don't give a shit. I'm going to try to compile as many of those and really give us an actionable set of demands to be demanding of our Congress people. Because, as boring as that sounds, people will die if we don't. We got to do this. We got to suck it up and do this. We can't just wait on President Bernie Sanders anymore, because that's not necessarily an option. I mean, unless Joe Biden drops dead real fast, that is not really going to happen. So we need to put our big girl panties on, and we need to step up and start making the calls and the emails. And that's my message for you today. So thank you all for tuning in. I appreciate the people who stuck around for the live video, and I'm probably going to be reposting this a couple different places. So thanks to everyone who tuned in. Also, thanks to everyone who supports this channel. I'd like to give just another shout out to the folks that have helped me get the medical supplies that I need, and also the people who are trying to help me fix my computer right now through online tech support. I really appreciate y'all. I also really appreciate my Patreons. So that's going to be Kali, Holly Smith, Ranger Jenny, Woo Hooligan Comedy, Swoletariat, TX Watson. You guys make this worth doing. You know, it's not about the money. Like, if you look at how much money I'm making on Patreon, I'm not buying like sushi with it or anything. It's barely covering buying like a microphone or anything. It's not gonna help me afford a new laptop, but it gives me a lot of moral support, and I appreciate that. And hopefully we can get it to the point where I can make a living off of that. And I'm not trying to get rich off of this, by the way. If I ever get to a point where I'm making a tremendous amount of money through Patreon, what I'm going to start doing is redistributing my own wealth through that to smaller leftist projects that I keep in touch with, because I personally try to mentor and do whatever I can, even if it's just providing moral support or cheering on small leftist creators and projects that I appreciate. And if I could take a minute to give a shout out to a couple of those projects that I think are criminally undersubscribed, that you guys should go subscribe to. One of the first, Sustainable Justice. I don't know anybody else who is doing in-depth leftist analysis of Supreme Court level decisions, like just consistently talking about Supreme Court judicial decisions, except for Sustainable Justice. And I'm absolutely here for it. It's very in-depth and I love it. So go subscribe to that channel. It's great. TX Watson also has a great channel. It gets really big brain and philosophical sometimes. Sometimes, you know, that could make it a little hard to watch for some people, but the ideas are so great and so important, and they put so much effort into those videos that I would really, really appreciate if at least a few of you went and subscribed to them as well. And of course, I have to shout out creators that have been there for me, like Swoletariat, who is currently doing a lot of like in-home workout videos, which is awesome. I have done like a full body exercise, a core exercise, and a mobility and stretching exercise program with his channel this far, and those have been pretty cool. I don't know if he's going to keep doing those through the crisis, but if you're trying to get fit through the crisis, Swoletariat's a good channel to turn to. And I also have to say that I appreciate Woo Hooligan Comedy for, you know, kind of being there for me and kind of a way to kind of bounce ideas off of another creator. And there are other creators I would like to shout out in the future. I might do like I don't know, tell me in the comments if you'd like to see me do like an oops all eyeballs type thing, kind of like Thought Slime has done, like I have done in the past, where I just shout out a bunch of these smaller projects that I'm working with. Like, oh, for example, also Faye Fahrenheit. I think that that she's doing great work, and that she has some pretty cool content coming in the near future, and I'm really excited to see her channel grow as well. Even if she's not as small as some of these other channels I'm talking about, she's still not too much over 1,000, so go sub to her as well. That's a great decision, and thank you all so much. I'll see you next time.